All right, guys, we are back with fairy tales. We're going to read Snow White today. We're going to read two versions, one the classic version, and then after that, we will go ahead and read an adaptation. And the reason, again, we're reading adaptations is so that you can see how other authors are doing this, and you can begin to do some of that work on your own and make some great changes to the fairy tales that you're adapting. Okay, here's the classic version first. Once upon a time in winter, the flakes of snow were falling like feathers from the sky. A queen sat sewing at a window. The frame of the window was made of black ebony wood. While she was sewing and looking out the window, she pricked her finger. 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. The red looked pretty upon the white snow. The queen thought, I wish I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame. Soon after, she had a little daughter. The daughter was as white as snow, had a mouth as red as blood, and had hair as black that was as black as ebony. She called the little Snow White, or she was called Little Snow White. When the child was born, the queen died. After a year passed, the king took another wife. She was beautiful, but she was proud and vain. She could not bear that anyone else should eclipse her in beauty. She had a wonderful looking glass. Oh, that's like a mirror, a looking glass. She stood in front of it and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? The looking glass answered, Thou, O queen, are the fairest of all. Then she was satisfied, for she knew the looking glass spoke the truth. But Snow White was growing up. She grew more and more beautiful. When she was 7 years old, she was as beautiful as the day and more beautiful than the queen herself. The queen asked her looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? It answered, You are fairer than all who are here, Lady Queen, but more beautiful still is Snow White, I have seen. The queen turned yellow and green with envy. From that hour, whenever she looked at Snow White, she hated the girl. Envy and pride grew higher and higher in her heart like a weed. She had no peace day or night. She called a huntsman and said, Take the child away into the forest. I will no longer have her in my sight. Kill her and bring me back her lung and liver as a token. The huntsman obeyed and took Snow White away. But when he drew his knife, Snow White began to weep. Dear huntsman, leave me my life, she begged. I will run away into the forest and never come home again. The huntsman took pity on her and said, Run away, you poor child. A young boar just then came running by. The huntsman stabbed it and cut out its lung and liver. He took them to the queen as proof that the child was dead. He cooked and salted them, and the queen ate them. That's kind of morbid. Now the child was all alone in the great forest. She was terrified and did not know what to do. She began to run. She ran over sharp stones and through thorns. The wild beasts ran past her, but they did her no harm. She ran until it was almost evening. She saw a little cottage and went into it to rest herself. Everything in the cottage was small but neat and clean. There was a table set with a white cover and 7 little plates. On each plate was a little spoon and 7 little mugs. Against the wall stood 7 little beds with white quilts. Snow White was so hungry and thirsty, she ate some vegetables and bread from each plate. She drank a drop out of each mug. She did not wish to take all from only one. She was tired, so she laid herself down on one of the beds. But she could not find one to suit her. One was too long, another too short. At last she found that the seventh one was right. She remained in it, said a prayer, and went to sleep. When it was dark, the owners of the cottage came back. They were 7 dwarfs who dug in the mountains for ore. They lit their 7 candles and saw someone had been there. Everything was not in the same order in which they had left it, sorry. The first said, Who has been sitting on my chair? The second said, Who has been eating off my plate? The third, Who has been taking some of my bread? The fourth, who has been eating my vegetables? The fifth, who has been using my fork? The sixth, who has been cutting with my knife? The seventh, who has been drinking out of my mug? Then the first looked round and saw there was a little hollow on his bed. Who has been getting into my bed? He asked. The others checked their beds and each called out, someone has been lying in my bed too. When the seventh looked at his bed, he saw Snow White. He called the others, and they brought their 7 little candles. The light fell on Snow White. Heavens, what a lovely child! They cried. They did not wake her up, but let her sleep in the bed. When it was morning, Snow White awoke. She was frightened, but the dwarfs were friendly. They asked her what her name was. My name is Snow White, she answered. How have you come to our house? Asked the dwarfs. Snow White told them about her stepmother and the huntsman. The dwarf said, if you will take care of our house and keep everything neat and clean, you can stay with us. You will want for nothing. Yes, with all my heart, said Snow White, and she stayed. In the mornings, the dwarfs went off to the mountains and looked for copper and gold. In the evenings, they came back, and their supper was made ready. The girl was alone the whole day, so the good dwarfs warned her, beware your stepmother. She will soon know you are here. Be sure to let no one enter. Meanwhile, the queen could not Meanwhile, the queen could not but think she was again the most beautiful of all. Wow, I really stumbled over that sentence. Let me try it one more time. Meanwhile, the queen could not but think she was again the most beautiful of all. She went to her looking glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? The glass answered, O Queen, you are fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and no one is so fair as she. The Queen knew the looking glass never spoke falsely. She knew the huntsman had betrayed her, and Snow White was still alive. The Queen thought and thought about how she might kill Snow White. At last she thought of something. She painted her face and dressed like an old peddler woman. No one could have known her. By the help of witchcraft, she made a poison comb. The queen went over the 7 mountains to the house of the 7 dwarfs and knocked on the door. Good things to sell, cheap, cheap, she cried. Snow White looked out and said, go away. I cannot let anyone come in. I suppose you can look, said the old woman. She pulled the poisonous comb out and held it up. It pleased the girl so well, she let herself be tricked and opened the door. When they had made a bargain, the old woman said, now I will comb you properly. Poor Snow White let the old woman do as she pleased. When she had hardly put the comb in Snow White's hair, when the poison took effect, the girl fell down senseless. You, perfection of beauty, you are done, said the wicked woman, and she went away. Thankfully, it was almost evening. When the 7 dwarfs came home, they saw Snow White lying as if dead. At once they suspected the stepmother. The dwarfs looked and found the poisoned comb. As soon as they took the comb from her hair, Snow White recovered. She told them what had happened. They warned her once more to be upon her guard and to open the door to no one. Back at the castle, the queen went in front of the looking glass and said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? Then it answered as before, O Queen, you are the fairest of all I see, but over the hills where the 7 dwarfs dwell, Snow White is still alive and well, and none is so fair as she. The queen trembled with rage. Snow White shall die, even if it costs me my life. She went into a secret room where no one ever came. There she made a very poisonous apple. Outside it looked pretty, but whoever ate the piece of the red I'm sorry. Outside it looked pretty, but whoever ate a piece of the red cheek must surely die. The queen painted her face and dressed up as a farmer's wife. She went over the 7 mountains to the cottage of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked at the door. Snow White put out her hand. Snow White put her hand Try that one more time. Snow White put her head out of the window. I cannot let anyone in. The 7 dwarfs have forbidden me. It is all the same to me, answered the woman. I shall soon get rid of all my apples. I will give you one. No, I dare not take anything. Are you afraid of poison? Said the old woman. Look, I will cut the apple in 2 pieces. You eat the red cheek, I will eat the white. Snow White longed for the fine apple. When she saw the woman eat part of it, she could resist no longer. She stretched out her hand and took the poisonous half. She had hardly a bite in her mouth when she fell down dead. The queen laughed aloud, white as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood. This time the dwarfs cannot wake you up again. Soon the queen asked again of the looking glass in her home. Looking glass on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all? It answered at last, O queen, in this land you are the fairest of all. Then her envious heart had rest, so far as an envious heart can have rest. The dwarfs came home and found Snow White lying on the ground. She breathed no longer. They looked for anything poisonous, but it was no use. The poor child was dead. All 7 sat around her and wept for 3 days. They had a transparent coffin made of glass. Of co- I'm sorry. They had a transparent coffin of glass made. They laid her in it and wrote her name upon it in golden letters. They put the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always stayed by it. Birds came and wept for Snow White too. First an owl, then a raven, and last a dove. Snow White lay a long time in the coffin. She did not change, but looked as if she were asleep. It happened that a king's son came into the forest. He went to the dwarf's house to spend the night. He saw the coffin and the beautiful Snow White. He said to the dwarfs, Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it. But the dwarfs answered, We will not part with it for all the gold in the world. Then let me have it as a gift, for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor and prize her as my dearest possession. As he spoke in this way, the good dwarfs took pity upon him and gave him the coffin. The king's son had Snow White and her coffin carried away by his servants on their shoulders. As they marched, one man stumbled over a tree stump. The poisonous piece of apple came out of Snow White's throat by the shock. Before long, she opened her eyes. Heavens, where am I? She cried. The king's son told her what had happened. He said, I love you more than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's palace. You shall be my wife. Snow White was willing and went with him. Their wedding was held with great splendor. Snow White's wicked stepmother was invited to the feast. When she had arrayed herself in beautiful clothes, she went before the looking glass. She said, looking glass on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all? The looking glass answered, O queen, of all here the fairest is you, but the young queen is fairer by far, it is true. The wicked woman uttered a curse. She was so utterly wretched, she knew not what to do. At first, she would not go to the wedding at all, but she had no peace and had to go see the young queen. When she went in, she recognized Snow White. She stood still with rage and fear, but iron slippers had already been put upon the fire. They were brought in with tongs and set before her. Then she was forced to put on the red hot shoes and dance until she dropped down dead. So that has a rather dark ending, perhaps not the one you've heard before. And so basically, what they did is they invited her to the wedding, knowing that she would come because she couldn't resist seeing who was more beautiful than she. And when she got there, they had these shoes that were made of iron and had been heated up like in fire and made her put them on and dance, and it killed her. Let's read a different version now and see how that goes and if it ends any differently. Snow White and the 7 Trolls. So we already know that they've changed the characters at least slightly in this. In a dark, faraway forest lived a queen. She was the most beautiful queen in the land. But when she looked into her mirror, it didn't show her perfect face or shiny crown. It showed how she looked on the inside, wicked. Mirror, mirror on the wall, said the queen, who is the most beautiful of them all? A ghostly face appeared in the mirror. It is Snow White, laughed the face. The queen went into a rage. "Who is this Snow White?" she screamed. The mirror showed a beautiful girl playing in the forest. Her hair was as black as night. Her skin was as white as snow. The wicked queen began to keep an eye on Snow White. She hid behind trees and watched her pick flowers in the forest. She sent the birds to follow her as Snow White fetched water at the river. With each year, Snow White grew more and more beautiful. So on her 18th birthday, the queen sent Snow White a present. It was a red, juicy apple wrapped in gold paper, but the queen had put a terrible curse on it. When Snow White bit into the apple, she fell into a deep sleep. The queen screeched with joy. She will sleep forever unless kissed by a worthy prince. Only that kiss will break the curse. Nearby, seven mean and ugly trolls heard the queen's screeches. Their names were Smelly, Stinky, Icky, Yucky, Slimy, Gooey, and Pickles. They ran to find the sleeping Snow White. But they weren't there to rescue Snow White. You see, trolls are oh so sneaky. The trolls took Snow White to their little cave in the forest. They placed her on a bed of grass. When the trolls sent word throughout the land that they needed a prince to break the curse, if the prince brought Snow White the perfect gift, she would become his queen, the most beautiful queen in all the land. But Smelly, Stinky, Icky, Yucky, Slimy, and Gooey had no plan to tell the prince how to break the curse. Their plan was to take the riches each prince would bring and keep it for themselves. You see, trolls are also very greedy. But Pickles was not like the other trolls. He was smaller and made to do all the work, especially the cooking. He cooked all day and night, and when he wasn't cooking, he was cleaning and shining pots and pans. Pickles felt sad for Snow White. Each night, Pickles would place a single red rose in Snow White's hand. He would look at the moon and wish that one day a worthy prince would arrive. One by one, prince after prince came to see Snow White. They marveled at her beauty. Each brought present better than the prince before. The riches piled higher and higher. The trolls laughed and snorted with glee each time a prince left with no luck breaking the curse. Finally, one day a prince from the poorest country in the land showed up. "I have nothing to give Snow White but my love," he said. Pickles knew this prince was the one. But Smelly, Sticky, Icky, Yucky, Slimy, and Gooey screamed at the prince to leave. "Without gold or silver or other riches, you will not be able to break the curse." The poor prince hung his head and shuffled back to his horse to return home. Pickles snuck up behind him and whispered, "Please, dear sir, give Snow White a kiss goodbye." The prince leaned down and gave Snow White a soft kiss. "Oh dear," she sighed as she woke up and saw the old worn clothes. "I so hoped I would get kissed by a rich prince. I but I will be your queen if I can take Pickles with us." The prince agreed. Pickles quickly gathered his pots and pans, and even though the prince had no riches, the three lived happily ever after. Of course, that's because Pickles had hidden all the gold and silver inside his pots and pans. Smelly, Sticky, Icky, Yucky, Slimy, and Gooey were left with nothing and no one to cook their meals. So, a very different tale of Snow White there. I mean, the very basic structure is the same in terms of Snow White um, being put into a deep sleep and then having that curse broken. But almost everything else about it was different. She wasn't born as to a queen. She wasn't found by the trolls before she was poisoned, like she was by the dwarves. And the ending is obviously much different as well. So this is a perfect example of just how different you can make an adaptation based on the same basic story. So I hope you found both of those entertaining, and I hope you learned something from them that you can apply to your own writing. You guys are doing well with your own writing, and I'm looking forward to getting those published here in a week and a half or so, so we can celebrate with our first grade friends on Zoom. Miss Legassi and I have a plan for that in place. So um, let's keep working hard so we can show the first graders our best work of the year.